Good evening and welcome to Live from the View. We are a weekly online streaming program that is being produced by the Community Arts of Bellevue. We've been doing this since April 8th of last year, right after COVID hit, as a way to provide people with good quality content of things that they might be interested in, particularly if you're a curious person, tied to the arts. But tonight we're going to venture into something other than concerts and literary workshops and things like that. We've got a very, very special edition tonight. We're going to talk about the COVID vaccine. And we know that that's of interest to a lot of people. We have tonight with us Dr. Mace Rothenberg, who just recently retired from Pfizer as their chief medical officer. He led their worldwide medical and safety organization that is responsible for ensuring that the patients, physicians, and regulatory agencies have the right information to administer their medicines safely and appropriately. He began his career with Pfizer in 2008, where he worked in the oncology area, and he was responsible for a team that helped develop 11 vaccines or 11 medications for cancer that got approved. So he's got quite a great track record. Also with us tonight is Melinda Buntin, who is the Mike Kerr Professor of Health Policy and founding chair of the Department of Health Policy at Vanderbilt Medical Center. Her work is focused on the healthcare delivery and costs, with an emphasis on improving the value that is provided and delivered by the healthcare system. And what is, I think, so interesting is that she's co-leading the Vanderbilt Policies for Action Research Hub, which is conducting research on ways to improve the health and educational outcomes of low-income students. So we have quite a dynamic duo here tonight. They're going to provide us with current, concise, scientific information about the COVID vaccines and how it's going to impact our lives. So during the program, we do have a chat room, and we invite you to please submit any questions that you might have. We're more interested in questions than comments, because we expect a few, and we would like to get to all of them if possible. So please, without further ado, I welcome you and ask you to welcome, please, Dr. Mace Rothenberg and Melinda Buntin. Thank you.
Hey, Mace.
Hi, Melinda.
So this is going to be a fun hour because I've been looking forward to talking with you. And I know we're going to have an interesting conversation about a lot of things related to vaccines. But given Kathleen's introduction, I wanted to just sort of jump in and ask you some questions as an expert on vaccine development, and just start us off with some really great scientific information, like what really is a COVID vaccine? Like what's new about it, and what are the differences between the vaccines?
Yeah, great question. And thanks very much for having the show. I think there's so much information that it's easy to get overwhelmed. And so many of the sources of information actually focus on the sensational or controversial. And there's not really enough time given to put this all in context and put it all together. So that's what really I hope we're able to accomplish in the next hour. So what a vaccine is, any vaccine, is a way of introducing something into your body that actually can be recognized by your immune system. And so if you're ever exposed to that infectious agent in the future, your body is ready for it, and you will not get infected because you have the immunity built up as a result of the vaccine. So that's very simple, and that's what childhood vaccines are, pneumococcal vaccines, meningitis vaccines, and the COVID-19 vaccine as well. That's the common thread of what a vaccine is and what it's supposed to do.
And so what we've heard a lot of this week, and I'm glad to be able to ask you this again, is about the pause in the Johnson & Johnson or J&J vaccine. But here in Tennessee, there's still plenty of Pfizer and Moderna vaccine available, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right now, what's happened recently is that we've reached a bit of a tipping point. I'm sure everybody remembers seeing the lines of people waiting hours, sometimes days, to receive the vaccination, and how the demand far outstripped the supply. And actually, the manufacturers worked 24/7 to try and balance that off a little bit. And now we're at that tipping point where the supply is actually able now to meet the demand. So you'll no longer see those days-long waits or even the hours-long waits. There are, in fact, many areas around the country where you could walk in to a vaccination center and be vaccinated that same day within a few minutes. So I think that if people have that as one of the barriers to getting vaccinated, it's no longer there. So I think that in terms of the supply is very readily available. And in fact, when you think about it, just since December, when the very first emergency use authorization was granted by the FDA, there have been 180 million vaccine doses administered. Just think about that.
Mhm.
This is a disease we didn't even know about a year and a half ago. And not only do we have an effective vaccine, but we've been able to ramp up manufacturing to that level. So what that means is about 80 million Americans are now fully vaccinated. The remainder are partially vaccinated because the Pfizer and the Moderna shots require 2 vaccines.
Mhm.
And we're well on our way towards getting that level that we're all shooting for, and that's herd immunity. But right now, it's only about 30% or 35% of Americans are fully vaccinated. So we have a long way to go. We can't let up now. Now's the time where you and your family members and your friends and your neighbors should really band together. And if you haven't been vaccinated, get vaccinated.
Yeah. As we were talking about right before we started this show, I actually took my son to get vaccinated this morning. It was great. All the nurses working at Vanderbilt are fantastic. It was almost like a celebration. Everyone was so happy to be there and finally get vaccinated. But as I was walking back to my car, I passed someone else who was in the parking lot. Her window was open and she was listening to the radio, and she was hearing someone on talk radio assert that the reason why we're still supposed to wear masks and we're supposed to stay 6 feet apart is that the vaccines don't really work. And I think there's so much misinformation about there. So I thought maybe we could have a conversation about like what's this piece of misinformation, I think, is based on the fact that the CDC is saying if, for example, you and I were vaccinated, we can get together, feel safe about getting together, even indoors without being masked. But if we add to our group people who aren't vaccinated, then we're still supposed to take precautions. And then, of course, when we're out and about in the world, the way I think about it is no one knows I'm vaccinated. So it's just a courtesy for me to wear a mask and make them feel safe.
Exactly. And to add to that, no vaccine, no matter how good, is 100% effective.
Yes.
So keep that in mind. And also, we've heard about these variants that have been identified in South Africa, Brazil, UK, and now even parts of the United States, that at least in the laboratory take a little bit higher concentrations of the antibody to be neutralized. So again, I think as these things, it's a dynamic situation. It's only prudent to continue to take the measures that we've been taking for the past year. That socially distance, wear a mask, wash your hands, and don't do things that are foolhardy. What I mean by that is don't go into large crowds where a large proportion of people are unmasked and maybe not vaccinated, where you're engaging in kinds of behavior where if one person has it, they're more likely to spread it to other people more rapidly because you're in such close proximity. So be prudent. So continue to maintain your distance. You could wear a mask, but if you're both vaccinated and you're sitting a few feet away, then you're much safer. Situation. So I think everybody should be doing what they can, not only to protect themselves, but also to step up and recognize their obligation to their family, to their neighbors, to their community, to society, to really step up and take on that as a challenge that we all can benefit from. So I think we're at that point, and it's almost like a rallying cry for not getting complacent. We still need to stay focused on achieving this higher level of vaccination around the country. That's the only way that the pandemic will end.
Yeah, that brings up so many things. One, as you point out, no vaccine is perfect. Right. So both Pfizer and Moderna seem like they're about 95% effective. That's fantastic, but it's not 100. Nothing is 100. And then the idea of these variants is of big concern. I recently read that they're starting to track that in Tennessee, and it's very clear these variants are present in Tennessee and are showing up in a greater fraction of samples. And then one thing I wanted to comment on too was we're seeing surges in the United States, in Canada, in India, all around the world. I mean, Michigan right now is experiencing a major surge. I believe New Jersey is as well. So we're all watching the data, my colleagues and I, very carefully here in Tennessee. And of course, levels are not zero. They're way above, honestly, where we could have dreamed of even a few months ago. But they're not as high as they were right before the new year. So we're down from that level at least.
But keep in mind, despite all the progress, despite the 80 million Americans who have been fully vaccinated, yesterday, 75,000 Americans were diagnosed with COVID and 1,000 Americans died from COVID. So this is still a very real and very present danger. And I think everybody should be thinking about what can they do personally to make sure they're not counted among those statistics.
Now, I know this is a crowd that is really interested in the arts and things like that. And so, of course, they want those things to look forward to. I mean, I do. One of the things I love about living here in Nashville is live music. I'm a huge fan of Bluebird on the Mountain, one of my favorite things about living here. But of course, even though that's outdoors, that involves people generally sitting in very close quarters. So I'm thinking about these summer events and concerts and festivals and, I'm thinking about what will make me feel safe. What would make you feel safe before you bought some tickets?
Yeah. So actually, this past weekend, my wife and I went to the Frisch Museum to see the Picasso exhibit. And what museums have done to try and control the number of people who are in this closed space is sell tickets with certain times for admission. So that way, it controls the flow of people to a safer level, so that people could spread out more easily and still enjoy the exhibit. Everyone was wearing masks. People were standing next to people from their own household, but we tried to stay a little bit distant from people who were not from our household. But I think people were very courteous, and I felt very safe doing that. I've earlier this month traveled to Colorado to visit our son who lives there. We double masked while we were on the plane. The plane in both directions was full. Even middle seats were full, which made us a little bit uncomfortable. But again, reading about the way that airlines are responding to this, they really point out how they're cleaning the plane, the air circulation in the plane, the requirement of wearing masks, and people who refuse to wear masks are removed from the plane so as not to endanger other people. So I think there are things that we're able to do now safely that will not necessarily put us at undue risk. And I think that with more people being vaccinated, we'll see things becoming less and less stringent and our society opening up more and more. We're certainly seeing that economically. Certainly the stores, businesses are opening up. There's more of a demand for services and products. So I think we're really on our way. So now is not the time to let up. We don't want to stumble. We want to see this recovery really take off in 2021. And again, it's up to us to make it happen.
It's up to us. Yes, I think that's true. I also went and saw the Picasso exhibit. I thought it was great. And I was cognizant of the fact that everyone was wearing a mask and that museums and airplanes and things like that, they have pretty good air filtration systems because it's part of the way they operate, but not everywhere does and not everywhere can. So I guess it's a good thing to keep your eye on when you're deciding what you're going to go see is, are you vaccinated? And then a question that I see just came into the chat, which is a really tricky one to answer. So I think we should probably take a couple minutes on it is, if I'm vaccinated and I come in contact with someone who has COVID, can I get it and give it to someone else? And my reading of the literature is that this is extremely rare. And that's why the CDC has said that vaccinated people can associate with each other, but it's not a zero chance. Is that your reading?
Correct. And in fact, that was a big unanswered question when the initial trials were first reported, because they were their endpoint was people who got clinically infected with COVID,
Right.
had the clinical symptoms, had a test that showed they had the coronavirus. What they didn't do was monitor people on a regular basis with nasal swabs to see, were they asymptomatic? Did they have COVID and not have any symptoms? And therefore, how did the vaccines affect what's called nasal carriage? Whether you can carry the virus even though you're vaccinated. But there have been some follow-up studies done after the vaccines have been approved. We still continue to study vaccines and medicines after they're approved or authorized. It's called pharmacovigilance, and it gives us huge amounts of additional data to give us even more insight into the safety and efficacy of our medicines. So what they have shown is that indeed vaccines are highly effective in reducing or eliminating that nasal carriage, even in asymptomatic individuals. But again, it's not 100% effective. So there is that risk. So question is, wearing a mask is relatively easy for most people to do. And wouldn't you like to do something that's easy, that gives you an added level of protection for yourself, for the other individual? Because what they've also found is that there may be an association between how much virus you're exposed to and the potential severity of the infection. So if you could reduce that volume, if somebody coughs or sneezes in your face, God forbid, that if you're wearing a mask, you're less likely to have as much virus come at you. So you really need to do all the things you can, because we don't have complete knowledge yet. We're learning as we go along, and that information is helping to guide us in identifying what's safe to do and what may still require these precautions.
Yep. And some of that work is going on at Vanderbilt. I know some of my colleagues are doing study since, of course, many of the frontline providers at Vanderbilt were some of the first people vaccinated. And they do get exposed, of course, to new patients. So that's one of the things that's been interesting throughout this pandemic is we knew nothing about this coronavirus. That's why it was called the novel coronavirus right at the beginning. And we learn more and more, but sometimes we have to adjust what we're saying. And so that's why I watched the latest CDC guidance very carefully. And when the CDC came out and said, yes, vaccinated individuals can feel safe associating with each other indoors, that's great. Recently, they said that even if you've been vaccinated, even if you get exposed to someone with COVID, you don't have to yourself quarantine. So that's an additional layer of assurance based on new information that it's very unlikely that you are, as you said, going to get infected and transmit to someone else. So good news, and like reasons to be vaccinated, right? Reasons to be vaccinated include feeling that additional level of safety of it when associating, especially with other people who are vaccinated.
Absolutely right.
Yeah. Someone else has asked, do you feel that we will eradicate COVID, or will this be something we have to be vaccinated against each year?
Well, it's interesting that comes up, because actually earlier today, the CEO of Pfizer, Albert Bourla, made a statement suggesting that there may need to be booster shots for the COVID vaccine, maybe on an annual basis. It's been really a black box unknown, because again, we really haven't had the vaccine around long enough. It's only been 4 months. So when people say, how long does immunity last? We have 4 months of experience in the community. We have about a year's experience with all of our clinical trials. So we really have to follow large populations, both within clinical trials and in the general population, to see what happens over time. Because what happens when your body is exposed to the vaccine, the initial response is an antibody response. That goes up within the first month or so of the exposure, but that's not the totality of your immune response. There are also what are called memory T cells and memory B cells that stay around long after the antibodies have gone away, but still remember that spike protein from the coronavirus. So if they ever encounter that again due to a coronavirus, they can recognize that, mount a new antibody immune response, and eradicate that infection before it takes hold. So it's very important that we understand not just how long antibodies last, but how long clinical immunity lasts, because it may last long after the antibodies go away.
And I guess that's another reason why even people who've had COVID are being urged to get the vaccine.
Yes, exactly. Very important point, because the virus will evoke an immune response, but what's seen is that the immune response that occurs with the vaccine is actually stronger. And in those people who've already had the COVID-19 infection and then get the immunization, they get an even higher level of antibodies and a stronger immune response. We don't know if that's also going to be long lasting, but I think that's a really important reason why just because you've had the infection once doesn't mean that you should not get the vaccination.
And we do know, again, very rare, but there are some cases of people being reinfected with COVID.
Yes, in fact, this is something that happened, especially in South Africa. And that's why everyone was concerned for a while about the South African variant, because when that took hold, what they found was not only people were getting infected with that for the first time with the COVID-19, but people who had gotten the original version of COVID-19 were still susceptible to that South African variant. So they could get infected all over again. And in many cases, that infection was worse. So
Interesting. I didn't know that part.
Getting a vaccine that can actually cover all those known variants is really important. So another reason to get vaccinated.
Yeah. You're bringing up South Africa, and I see that one of the people listening to this live stream is asking about whether we should be concerned with how other countries are dealing with or not dealing with the vaccine, and should we be concerned about that? And I am concerned about that because we've had so many illnesses in the history of the world that we've tried to eradicate. We've eradicated very few of them, and this one, again, it's novel, so we don't know how fast it mutates. And of course, we're also interconnected now. Our economies, our travel, everything. So I'm worried about that. How worried are you?
Yeah, I share your concerns. When we talk about herd immunity, sometimes we talk about our community, our city, our nation. But actually, in order to get true herd immunity, we really have to think globally. And that's why having efforts for the vaccine to not only be sent to cities and towns in the US that need it, but also around the world is really important. Because when it comes to a virus that can easily travel with someone on a plane going from one part of the world to another, you really can't have that eradication unless you have it eradicated in all parts of the world. And so the other aspect is that this is a bit of a race between how many people get vaccinated and can no longer be infected by the virus versus those individuals who are still susceptible to the infection and the rate of natural mutations that will occur. So you want to shrink that number of people who are susceptible, who could develop these resistance mutations as much and as fast as possible to lower the risk that a resistant mutation will come along that's resistant to the vaccines. So that's why there's really a worldwide urgency for there to be global vaccinations and being able to help the developing world access the vaccinations as well as the developed world. We really can't be safe to travel internationally until everyone is safe.
So when we get vaccinated, we protect ourselves, we protect those around us, we protect those in other countries that we could expose if we were traveling. I also think about how we protect, in my household, I'm protecting I have a child who is not eligible to get a vaccine yet. So that's another question maybe, is when can we expect younger children to have a vaccine approved for them? And then, of course, there are some people who can't be vaccinated because they're immunocompromised or they're allergic to something that the vaccine is made with. There are some groups that just aren't eligible for the vaccine.
Right. And so I think that they're really studying now whether people who have underlying autoimmune diseases are at risk of from getting the vaccination or have less of a response to it. So for people who fall in those situations, please go to your local medical center or university hospital to participate in these trials so we could learn how best to manage people who are in your situation. Because we want to figure out ways that people like you can be protected. And then the issue of vaccinating younger individuals. The Pfizer BioNTech vaccine initial trial had individuals 16 and older. enroll. The Moderna trial and Johnson & Johnson 18 and older. And we talk about herd immunity requiring at least 80%, 90% of people to be vaccinated, to be protected. When you look at the proportion of individuals in the United States who are younger than 18, it's 22%. So we have to get to a point where we're able to vaccinate younger individuals in order to be able to achieve that herd immunity. So actually, there have been trials that have been done now in younger individuals. And in fact, Pfizer has submitted a supplemental emergency use authorization to the FDA based on data from children 12 to 15 years old. So that's under review now. So stay tuned, because hopefully the FDA will review that. And if they do find the data compelling, that's effective and safe, then that will expand the group of individuals down to a lower age group. And now both Moderna and Pfizer have opened trials for children as low as, I think, a year old or 3 years old. So they're really trying to gain that experience to allow that population to be protected as well.
Yes. And I know you may know more about this than you're supposed to say, having formerly worked at Pfizer, but my understanding of the trial in the children aged 12 to 15 was that there were no children who got the vaccine who got infected with COVID. So that's really, there was a limited number, of course, about 3,000, but that seems promising for a rapid approval. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, so they really triangulated information. So they had the clinical data from people age 16 and older on the original trial. They knew the immune response they got. They know from other vaccines that if you get a similar immune response in younger individuals, you're able to get that clinical protection. So when they saw the immune response, which was really one of the main endpoints for that trial, be as great, if not greater, than those that were seen in older people, they said that's sufficient information for us to extend this authorization, or hopefully extend this authorization down to 12 years old. We're waiting for that decision to come. But I think that it's certainly a faster way of getting this group protected, rather than doing another 30,000 participant trial and waiting until they have sufficient number of infections to see if the group that got placebo did better than the group that, or didn't do as well as the group that got the vaccination. So I think it really is recognizing that there's an urgency here that really prompts us to be able to take our total experience and apply it to this situation and getting as many people protected as possible.
Now, another question I see from people listening is about pregnant women. I feel like this is an area where there's actually been some confusion and maybe some misinformation. I was on a similar podcast talking with some OBGYNs a couple of months ago, and they explained that there were people who got pregnant during the original trial, and there were really no problems for them or for their babies. Is that still the case?
As far as I know, again, no longer working for Pfizer, I can't tell you, but I haven't heard anything to contradict that. So really, there should be no confusion that there have not been any ill effects on the baby or the mother after having gotten the COVID-19 vaccination, when they may not have even known they were pregnant.
Yes.
And now there's been some studies about whether the antibodies that are produced by the mother can be passed on to the baby through milk in order to protect the baby. So I think that, again, all the data and evidence that we have right now point in that direction. Can we be 100% certain that in 20 years from now something may not happen? We can't. But it's a question of, are you willing to put your child at risk, or your own life at risk if you're a pregnant woman, based on something that may or may not happen 20 years from now? Or do you want to protect yourself from the real and present danger of contracting and dying from COVID-19?
Yes. Yes. And I believe that there were some early indications, before vaccines were available, that someone who contracted COVID-19 might be giving birth earlier, which of course is dangerous for them and the child. So I've got another question here, which is this is a tough one. I talk about this one a lot, so I'd love to chat with you about this one. How do I convince my friends and relatives who are frightened, maybe because of misinformation, that vaccines are safe, and certainly safer than not taking the vaccine? I mean, you just made one point, which is there's a clear and present danger right now. What else do you say?
One of the things that we don't know very much about is what influences individuals' decisions
Mm-hmm.
about whether or not to take a vaccine in this situation. We certainly have thrown a lot of information at the audience in this
Mm-hmm.
hour, but also from all the people that you hear on
Mm-hmm.
TV programs.
Yep.
But that may not be sufficient for a number of individuals who say, I'm still concerned. So I think what we have to do is really address those concerns. Sometimes it really takes somebody who is like them, who has a similar background, has gone through similar life experiences, who they know and respect and can relate to really sit down and answer their questions. And then suddenly it really clicks into place. And if there's one thing that I'm disappointed about, is that we haven't seen more public service announcements with those people, whether
Mm-hmm.
they be performers, athletes, famous individuals, politicians, people who've done great things, really from any walk of life, being able to really talk about their experience and what makes them convinced that this is the right thing to do. Because again, it's, two people could say the exact same thing. One it will click with, and the other one will just go right over their head. So
Mm-hmm.
we have to make sure that we reach people wherever they are, in whatever manner they can then understand it and begin to feel comfortable about it.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. I think basically you, the person who's asking this question, who's listening to us, you are the person in maybe the best position to be convincing, which is why I'm glad you're asking the question. And when I think about what questions I've heard from people, one of the things that I do is I tell them that I've been vaccinated, and I tell them that my family members are being vaccinated, that I signed up my son just when he turned 16 to be vaccinated, and my parents have been vaccinated.
Yeah.
And then I've answered some questions, some people's questions and concerns about the issue related to pregnancy. I think that was something that was weighing on people's minds, even if they weren't pregnant, if they could become pregnant. So I think that's an important answer, that we have no evidence of adverse effects on either pregnant women or their children right now from the vaccine. And we do have evidence of adverse effects of having COVID on pregnant women and children. So that's a really important one.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to think, what other points do I use?
Well, the other thing is that the vaccine can have side effects. So it's not
Mhm.
like you don't know you've received a vaccination. Very often, people will have a little bit of discomfort in the muscle where they receive the shot. Either after the first or the second dose, they could have muscle aches or joint aches, fever, chills, headaches, some fatigue. But in the vast majority of cases, these are short-lived, 24,
Mhm.
48 hours, and they're mild to moderate, which means it doesn't interfere with your activity of daily
Mhm.
living. In about 5 to 10% of people, they are affected to a point where they say, I'm going to call in sick from work because I just feel really
Mhm.
tired. But even then, it goes away in a few hours. So there is going to be something that happens. It's just a reflection of your body's immune system
Mhm.
being revved. So
Yeah.
that's fine. But I think that that's a small price to pay for the protection that you'll be getting from this devastating illness. So for
Mhm.
me, it's really not even a question. That's
Yeah.
clearly in the
Yeah.
vaccination.
When I was talking to my father-in-law about the side
Mhm.
effects, and after his second shot, he was really feeling tired, and
Yeah.
I said, "That's just your body working hard to
Mhm.
create an
Mhm.
immunity." And he said, "That makes me feel much better about feeling bad." So,
It does. It does. But on the few people who
mhm,
get the vaccine and don't have these side effects,
mhm.
not to worry,
Not to worry.
because the
Yes.
immune response in those individuals is just as good as in the people who get the side effects. So don't worry if you don't get side effects,
Yep.
if you should be that lucky.
Oh, I thought of one more thing that I talk to people
Mhm.
about, and maybe the listeners of this show will have seen. Of course, we're thrilled at being at Vanderbilt when Dolly Parton got vaccinated at Vanderbilt. I don't know if people saw this on social media, but she came in looking as glamorous as Dolly always does. She had that special gown with the cutout shoulders, so she wasn't like the rest of us trying to pull up our sleeves. She looked fantastic. And she was tweeting out that she got a dose of her own medicine because, of course, she'd made a major donation that helped with some vaccine-related research. So that's an example that we can be proud of here in Tennessee, Tennessee, and really standing up and taking a stand and showing the world that she was getting vaccinated. And I wish more people would do it.
Yeah,
I do
I
agree.
mean, there are just many amazing people who have done this, and some of whom have gotten some of the limelight, some of whom have been working in obscurity, but have done just heroic things to get us to this point. Because if you step back from looking at where we are on a day-to-day basis, but look at things in a broader perspective, it is truly amazing how far we've come in this length of time. Remember, we didn't even know of what a coronavirus was in November of 2020. I'm sorry, November 2019. Not only were we able to find out that it was a virus, but in January of 2020, the sequence of the virus was published. That allowed vaccine manufacturers to identify those part of the viral RNA that coded for those spike proteins that you see on those diagrams, generate vaccines against that actually could produce those spike proteins in a cell, start human testing 2 months later.
Amazing. Yeah.
Within 2 months after that, be able to say, yes, it's generating an immune response against that spike protein at levels that are likely to be protective in humans. A month later, enter into global randomized trials. 6 weeks after that, 30,000 people had been enrolled in the trial. 2 months after that, have the result of the trial showing that individuals were 95% protected, or protected 95% of the cases against the vaccine. And then within 11 days, have that application submitted to the FDA. Within 3 weeks, have that emergency use authorization granted. This whole process from first in human to emergency use authorization for the Pfizer vaccine was 7.5 months. It is remarkable. And I can tell you from firsthand experience that corners were not cut, that the insights that we got into the safety and efficacy of this vaccine were every bit as stringent as would have been if it had taken years. It was just done on a much
that's so
more
interesting.
tighter time frame. Why? Because we were living through a pandemic. There were so many cases that were being generated. We got information in a much shorter period of time, and we had the resources deployed to be able to gather that information in real time, so we knew when the number of cases that had occurred required to trigger the analysis, to convene this external group that reviewed it, said, yes, we recommend stopping the trial because extreme efficacy of the vaccine, reporting that out, and beginning the process of submitting for emergency use authorization.
That reminds me of, another one of the things sometimes you hear people say is they say, I don't want to be a guinea pig. Well, what you're pointing out and reminding us is that tens of thousands of people were required to be in the trials to demonstrate that these vaccines are safe and effective. And then another Nashvilleian, of whom we're very proud, is Dr. James Hildreth, of course. And he recently was commenting that now well over 100 million people have received this vaccine. And so no one's a guinea pig at this point. We're well past that.
Absolutely. And there is a national and international effort to try and collect information from people who are having side effects so that we can see if there's anything that occurs that we didn't observe in the clinical trial, we can identify it and then take appropriate actions to prevent it from happening, or making sure that we can manage that effectively. So there's still a lot of work that's being done, even though these vaccines have gotten emergency use authorization. What you may be hearing in the next month or two is that one of these, Pfizer or the BioNTech vaccine, will finally get FDA approval. And people will say, wait a second, I thought it was approved. No, it was actually authorized under a
Right. Yeah, that's a good
special
point.
accelerated process, which I can tell you was
Mhm.
every bit as rigorous as typical approvals are, but was done in a much shorter period of time. Now it's going through that whole more formal process with even more documentation and background materials for the FDA to then grant it formal authorization, formal approval. That should be happening in the next few months, I would imagine.
Okay, I'm seeing so many interesting questions coming in, so I'm going to
Mhm.
change the topic a little bit. So one person, maybe I'll take a stab at this one, and then you tell me if you agree. Says, "I'm not going to bars and restaurants yet, but is it safe to go to church? What can I do to make it safe, or can I?" So this is such a good question. So what I think about whenever I go someplace is, am I vaccinated? Will I be wearing a mask? Will others be wearing a mask? And how close will I be to other people? Is it crowded? Is it indoors, right? This is the list I go through. And we try and sort of simplify that, but the vaccine part has added another layer to it. So there are a lot of churches doing so many innovative things, having services outside, having people not sing during church services, which I think is a really important precaution. But if you can be in a well-ventilated spot, wearing a mask, not too close to others who are also wearing masks, then that would be, and the service doesn't go on for hours and hours, then you're taking a lot of precautions to do something that's important to you.
Right.
And so we all have to think nothing we're doing is with zero risk. But if this is very important to you and you can meet those criteria to feel safe and you want to spend, your risk budget, so to speak, on going to church, then great. I applaud you for making the choice to go to church rather than a bar or restaurant.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. And can you do that if you're vaccinated or if you're not vaccinated? Yes, you can. You're taking more of a risk if you're not vaccinated, but some people are in that category now. But keep in mind that if you're not vaccinated and you're in whatever setting, not just you may be affected by this, but the people who you come in contact with at home, at work, where people you interact with on a regular basis. And so it's a responsibility that you have not just to yourself, but your family, your neighbor, your community. So do everything that you can to be a responsible member of that community and really to help in the eradication of this pandemic. Only you really can help bring it to an end.
Yep. Okay, here's another great question. If I'm late getting my second shot, do I have to start over? And the answer is no.
Yeah.
No.
So the clinical trials were done. The Pfizer BioNTech vaccine was given the second dose 3 weeks after the first dose. In the Moderna, it was 4 weeks later. And that was the same thing for the AstraZeneca trial as well. AstraZeneca not having been approved in the United States yet. The idea was when the body was ready to get that booster, because what we were finding was, yes, the first dose gave a level of response, but it really wasn't nearly what we wanted to see in order to make sure there would be a high level of protection clinically from contracting the virus and getting the disease. So it was felt that after a period of time, in this case, 3 or 4 weeks, that booster shot would give you much greater immunity than one shot alone. So it really is getting the second shot. Not necessarily is it exactly 21 or 28 days later. Now, people have expressed some concerns that we're playing fast and loose with how long that period of time can be. The UK has said, well, in order to get more people with their first vaccination shot, we're going to be stretching out the time until people can come back for their second. There's really not a lot of data on that to say whether people will get as much immunity if you have a second shot delayed as if you'd gotten it on time. We just don't know. So that's why officials are recommending that the shots be given as close to being on schedule as possible. But if you are a few days or a week or two late, not to worry, but make sure you get that second shot.
Yes, agreed. And of course, there's a reason why there's an interval between the first and the second shot that relates to the way that your immune system works. So we don't want you to have the shot too early.
Right.
because then you wouldn't get the full immune response.
Right.
But yes, as you said, there are in fact debates in this country, or were debates, they're lessening now that vaccine supply has opened up, saying we should all wait longer in between to give more people that first shot. The U.S. has not chosen to take that path.
Right.
But
And now it's no longer an issue
Right.
because we have more sites capable of managing and treating vaccinating more people, and we have more vaccines waiting for those individuals. So that issue is no longer front and center.
So I've got another one coming in. One conspiracy theory I hear a lot is that the government can follow those who have gotten the shot. Is that even possible? So I guess there's two dimensions of this. One is that there's a conspiracy theory that there's something in the shot that makes you, as you know, your body trackable. The other is that information will be used to track you. And neither one really has any truth to it.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't know what the source of those rumors are, but it certainly has gotten a life of its own, and you hear it again and again. The fact of the matter is the mRNA vaccine has mRNA. It has some stabilizing ingredients. It has the lipid nanoparticles, the oil droplet that contains it and allows it to fuse with cells once it's administered to the body, and that's it. mRNA doesn't even last all that long in your body. It's degraded after it is able to begin to produce some of the proteins and stimulate the immune response. There's nothing in the vaccines that's trackable. So again, this has come up from I don't know where, but I think that we have to be concerned about erroneous information that ends up harming individuals by making them fear something that can help them.
Yeah.
And I think we should really avoid that. And the only way we do it is with information and knowledge and sharing that knowledge in an open and transparent and honest way.
Great. Let's see. There are a few here that I think we've addressed. We've talked about how the benefits of getting the vaccine really outweigh the side effects of the vaccine, which are temporary, really only last a couple of days. Let's see, we've talked about how there are vaccine studies being currently conducted for children under 16. We would expect there could be an approval of the vaccines currently available for children down to age 12, possibly, I would estimate even as early as this summer, possibly, but for younger children will take longer. But here's another question, that you can answer. What are the major differences between the different vaccines that have been developed?
So they fall into three categories. There's the mRNA vaccines. The Pfizer, BioNTech, and Moderna vaccine are using that platform, encapsulated in these fat droplets. There are the adenoviral vectors, as they're called. That's the AstraZeneca, Oxford, and Johnson & Johnson. What they're using is a modified cold virus called an adenovirus, into which they put in DNA, not RNA, but DNA that really is only for the portion of the virus that codes for the spike protein. So one question is, can I catch COVID from a vaccination? No, because they don't contain the virus. They contain only the short part of basically the blueprint of the virus that codes for that little spike protein that the immune system could recognize. So that the AstraZeneca and the Johnson & Johnson vaccine are DNA-based with an adenovirus. Then there's a third category that's basically a protein-based vaccine. A company in the US called Novavax is developing that. And that basically has the protein that are made in your body with the other vaccines, that's made in the laboratory. And then the protein is put into the vaccine along with something else that stimulates the immune system. And that also works to, once it's in your body, it has the protein there, your immune system recognizes that, and the same process takes place. So really, these are three different ways of getting to that same goal of having your body generate an immune response that recognizes the spike protein of the coronavirus. So when that actually comes in, you come into contact with that, when it's part of the virus, your body can fend it off and it can prevent you from getting infected.
Yep. So it's not the whole virus. You can't get sick. We're just teaching your body using the vaccine to attack that virus if it comes in by teaching it to attack that
Exactly.
spike protein.
So the vaccines are really stimulating
Mhm.
a very natural process in your body.
Mhm.
So let's think
Yeah.
of it that way, because people are saying, I don't want this foreign substance in my body.
Mhm.
Well, when you think about it, everything you eat or everything you take is a foreign substance into your body, but it really is able to nourish and protect and treat any illness in your body, and helping your body really fend off these diseases and the infection. And that's exactly what the vaccine is doing.
Mhm.
It's really causing your body's own natural immune system to be able to create the antibodies that can prevent the infection.
Mhm. Yes, yes. I think people are coming in and out. So we've got another
Mhm.
question related to if you've already had COVID, should you get the vaccine? And so
Mhm.
we said yes, because we want to make sure that your body has produced a very strong and lasting immune response, and the vaccine will produce that. You might have had a mild case, et cetera. Um, Someone else is asking, in the future, can the COVID vaccine be combined with a yearly flu shot so we can get one shot that covers both? Well, we don't know yet if we're going to need these COVID boosters or not, but I don't know if they could be combined. They seem very different.
Well, one of the things about the mRNA vaccine, that was again, it was really the right
Mhm.
platform at the right time, is that it allows the creation of a vaccine in a very short period of time.
Mhm.
And so actually we or Pfizer had a collaboration with BioNTech starting back in 2018
Mhm.
with a goal towards developing a flu vaccine, one that can include all the different proteins that cause the yearly flu, because each year you have to get a flu shot because it's a different combination of
Mhm.
these proteins. So you've got to get the right combination each year, and it may change each year. This would allow one vaccine to contain all those different possible proteins and be a universal flu vaccine. So that work
Great.
is still ongoing.
Yeah.
But that was really the genesis. So
Mhm.
that collaboration had existed when early in March, Ugur Sahin, the CEO and founder of BioNTech, called up Pfizer's head of vaccine research and development, Catherine Jansen,
Mhm.
and said, I think we might be able to apply this technology to develop a COVID-19 vaccine. And then they were off to the races.
Yeah, there are going to be so many amazing stories told about how people responded
Mhm.
to this pandemic.
Yes.
You're pointing out that there was ongoing research that could help.
Mhm.
We thought we'd apply it to flu. Same
Mhm.
thing with many other parts of the puzzle that had to be put together to create the vaccine and some of the treatments that we have so quickly. Now,
Yeah.
someone's asking if they've had COVID and recovered, should they consider donating plasma to help others? And does that work?
Yeah. Well, there was a lot of excitement about that before
Hmm.
we had vaccines, before we had the effective antibody cocktails that have come out both from Lilly and from Regeneron, that the only source of these antibodies were people who had generated their own antibodies. It's fairly painstaking in the fact that the person has to go in and have their blood basically filtered to collect these antibodies, and the rest of the blood is returned to their body, and then it has to be purified and then shipped to wherever it's needed. So that work is still continuing, but I don't think with the same urgency, because the need has shifted
Right.
now towards preventing COVID. But there are people who are still getting COVID, and for those individuals, having these antibody cocktails or the antibodies that have been manufactured by these two other manufacturers are also important to recognize. These are
Hmm.
important tools in treating people who do get infected with COVID-19. And in fact, in some cases, they are looking to see if they can be used to prevent people from getting COVID-19 after they've been exposed.
Hmm. Yeah. So it's just one of the many things we have available now. So not a critical factor or shortage the way it might have been a couple months ago.
Right. Hmm.
Someone else
Yeah.
is asking, they say they have so many allergies, food allergies, environmental allergies. Do I have any extra risks in taking the vaccine?
Yeah. Don't know the answer to that,
Hmm.
but it should not prevent you from being evaluated and considered for a vaccine. The only absolute indications for not getting, or absolute contraindications for not getting a COVID vaccine, is if you're known to be allergic to any element of the vaccine itself. So that is the mRNA or the lipid nanoparticle. And so people who may have had other allergies, and there have been people who've gotten allergic reactions, as we've heard from UK initially and from the US. And that's why now we have people wait 15 minutes after they're vaccinated, just so that if they are feeling lightheaded or they're feeling weak, that they can alert someone and they can be seen and managed effectively. Because there are indeed some people who have had what was considered an allergic type reaction soon afterwards, and they did need medical attention. But there didn't seem to be a clear correlation of people who were allergic to something else being cross-allergic to the COVID-19 vaccine. So we're still trying to work that out as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So it sounds like an instance of talk to your doctor, but don't necessarily be afraid. And when you go to get your vaccine, they are going to have you sit and wait after you have the vaccine for at least 15 minutes. And you are monitored there by medical personnel who can intervene if they see that there's an allergic reaction that is taking place.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we're sort of out of questions now. Is there anything that people didn't ask us that you think we should talk about?
One of the things that I think was really critical in this process was people stepping up. I've talked about people taking accountability for themselves and their loved ones, but people all along this process stepped up and said, there is this great need, and we're in a position to be able to address that need. And that actually happened while I was still working for Pfizer. The CEO said, you know what, this is the highest priority of the company. That no matter what you're working on, if you're called with a question or to join a meeting related to the vaccine, you drop everything and you do that. They spared no resources in the company, both personal as well as financial resources, going towards the vaccine. It's estimated that Pfizer spent between $1 and $2 billion of its own money in order to make sure that all the resources could be applied and things could move as fast as possible. Pfizer looked at the processes that were involved in developing a clinical trial, executing it, analyzing it, and almost re-engineered the entire process. Things that usually happen in sequence were now overlapping or even being done in parallel. People at every step along the way were stepping up, meeting challenges and overcoming those challenges. And that was the kind of can-do attitude that I think allowed the company to achieve this goal and allowed Moderna to achieve its goal and allowed the distribution of the drug so rapidly to these sites. So every step along the way, while it's frustrating that we can't get farther faster, we also have to appreciate how far we've come in such a short period of time and really celebrate the people who have really said, this is the way we normally do things. This is not a normal situation. We're going to do things differently, faster and better, and not cut corners.
Yeah.
And it just is an amazing triumph of science and medicine and public health to get to this point. And now we just have to see it through.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you it was an amazing year. I have never been prouder to work at a place like Vanderbilt, where people just did everything they could to help the patients who were showing up or do the research that was going to help the patients. Or in the case of my department, we formed an advisory committee and we put out lots of information for people to answer questions like some of the ones we've had come in through the chat. We've got infographics that explain herd immunity. We have handouts for parents, and we did work when asked, for example, by state and local leaders to investigate questions related to policy decisions they had to make. And so if anyone who's listening is curious about those things, we can post a link in the chat or on the screen to where some of that information can be found on my department's website. And we are also interested if you have feedback on it or have questions like the ones that came up today that you would like to see answered in that form. That group continues to meet and try and put out good, reliable public information. So.
Absolutely. The sources where you get your information matter. And I would urge everyone to go to a reliable source, one that is based on facts and where you can have your questions answered. So it's out there. It's just there for the taking. You've got to find it and you could rely on it.
Yeah. All right. Well, this was fun. I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. Thank you, everyone who listened. And thanks, Kathleen, for inviting us to do this.
Thank you, Melinda. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Mhm.
Thank you.